Hey everyone, it's Tim here, and in today's video we're continuing our look at exams and all the things you need to do for exams. One of those things is scales and technical work. So in today's video we're going to explore 3 ways to make teaching scales a little bit more interesting. And if you're getting value from these videos, please give us a thumbs up or leave a comment and make sure to subscribe to our channel. So why learn scales in the first place? Well, there's a number of reasons. Most obvious is the reason we were all taught scales, which is to increase our sort of finger agility and dexterity at the keyboard. And I think it does serve that purpose. Although some people would disagree and say that you can learn everything you need to about technique through repertoire. I know Barenboim was one of the main exponents of that, but there's many others that also believe that. I think a balance is great. I don't go overboard with scales. I certainly don't do hand exercises very much, but I think scales and arpeggios are a useful activity for students, if for no other reason than the fact that scales are the notes of the keys, and the notes of the keys are the ones that build pieces. And that's a connection that we really want students to understand and know, and it's a key component of our integrated music teaching approach. We want students to know about the musical elements, in this case key, but we want to know how that connects to other elements of the music. So the key of a piece determines the notes that are going to be in the melody, and those notes are represented by the scales that they learn. So that's a really important one. And in a moment I'll get through one of the activities that we can use to make scale playing and teaching a bit more interesting, which is improvising and composing. So back to the why do we learn scales? Well, yeah, it is a useful sort of focusing, centering activity to use as a warm-up in order to create the right environments for a practice session. I do still use them for that purpose, generally speaking, before I get into some pieces. But then again, sometimes I just jump right in and practice my pieces. And so the final reason you might be doing scales is because they're a required element of an exam or a competition or some kind of assessment for students. And for that reason, we do have to cover them most of the time in our lessons. And so let me show you those 3 ideas that I've got that can make this a little bit more interesting for you and your students. Okay, so one of the first ways that I love using scales is, as I mentioned at the start, that integration, that connection, helping students understand the relationship between scales and keys and melodies. So the best way to do that is to use the scale that they've learned as a compositional or improvisationary tool. So for example, let's say we're playing in D major and the student knows the scale of D major, and they've done this lots of times and they're getting a bit bored of it. Well, let's use some kind of an accompaniment pattern that we can play so that they can use those notes to improvise along to. So the simplest progression we could use would be the 1, 5, 6, 4. So I'm going to play that in my left hand because I'm going to try and improvise at the same time. So I've got the 1 chord, 5, 6, 4, and I'm going to improvise using the D major scale, which is what we want your students to do. So here we go. Now I'm using very limited notes. That was all the notes of one scale. I used the bottom half for one of them and the top half for the other. You don't need to go too wide on the piano. You don't need to use too many notes. Students can make up fun melodies with just 3 or 4 notes, no problem at all. So that's idea number 1. And if you want to allow the student to get involved in the making of these accompaniments, then what they can do is you can teach them a couple of these chord progressions. So for example, that descending bass line, maybe do 4 beats on each, whatever you'd like to. Teach them how to play that and then allow them to record that on their phones and then put the headphones in, listen to that, and then they can improvise over that at home. They don't need you anymore. And even better, you could ask them to create a chord progression using our 4-chord composing framework. We'll put a link to that if you haven't already seen it. Get them to create a 4-chord progression that they can use as their own accompaniment for their own scale improvising practice. Now, if you're not too keen on creating the accompaniment patterns yourself, then there's a great app out there called Music Clock. It looks a little bit like this, can't really see it on the screen. I've done some other videos about it, so we'll link to those. It's a great app, provides backing tracks that you can play along to. That's just one of them in any key. So check that one out as well, Music Clock. Okay, so idea number 2 builds on idea number 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the improvisation and create a composition. What's the difference between an improv and a composition? Well, really a composition is just an improvisation that has been written down. So once we've sort of come up with our improvisation, and I did one quite simply before. I kind of went... I think that was different again. But what we want to do is settle on one of those versions, and then in order to create the composition, we want students to write it down. Now, this is going to be a great skill. If your student has never written down music before, whether they do it on paper or they do it on computers, they're going to learn lots about the notes and the keys and the melodies and the relationships between all those things again. They're also going to learn about rhythm too. So keep it relatively simple. I'm using a fair bit of syncopation here. Most students won't naturally make things too syncopated. So if it's on the beat, that's great. Help them actually write it down and create a melody from it. And even better, if they've also used 4-chord composing to create their left-hand chord progression, they can actually play the left-hand chords, play the melody in their right hand, and they've got a composition. So that's idea number 2, taking idea number 1 and going that one little step further. All right, so let's get on to step number 3. So idea number 3 is to create some kind of scale challenge system for your student, or indeed your whole studio. And you could work this out on some kind of points basis, whereby every time a student plays a scale a certain number of times in their practice room or in the lesson, they earn a certain number of points. It could be a certain number of points for left hand, right hand, hands together, or any number of variations of the scale. Or it could be that it's played at a certain speed. If you've got small groups, you could actually have challenges within the lesson where people are trying to compete on speed, hopefully without the scale completely falling apart in the process. The other idea with this one is to have a checklist of ways that you can challenge your students to play scales differently. So for example, there's so many. We've actually got a separate handout for this, all about turning off autopilot in scales. And we'll put a link to this in the comments if you want to download it. But ideas like playing the scale with one finger. Now, that doesn't sound very difficult, but if you take a scale, like take the most complicated scale you know, let's say, I don't know, B minor, and try and play it with only one finger of either hand. It's surprising just how much muscle memory goes into learning scales. And when you take the muscle memory out by just using one finger, it can really make students think about the notes of that scale. And then there's lots of other ways you could do it. Playing with eyes shut, playing with crossed hands, playing staccato in one hand, and the other hand legato, swapping over, playing 2 octaves apart, starting at the top and going down. Contrary motion. I mean, there's an absolute wealth of different ways you can do it. You can play 3 against 2 patterns. You can play in different rhythms. So my teacher used dotted rhythms, backwards dotted. One she called pom, tiddly. You can use words like strawberry jam, strawberry jam, strawberry jam. You can do I love basketball, you can make up as many of these as you want to. Different accents as well in groups of 4. So you could do accent every 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or every second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So displaced accents, that's another great workout that I use actually for tricky passages within pieces as well. Just really makes you, all of these things are designed to, number 1, keep things more interesting, but number 2, make you focus. The worst thing that can happen when students are playing scales is their brain switches off. It goes into autopilot and they're not really thinking about it. It becomes a really worthless activity then. So all of these strategies are designed to keep things interesting, help build connections, and keep them focused on what they're trying to do. Okay, so if you want that full list of potential activities, and look, these are just a start, you can get as creative as you want, then we'll put a link to this down below with our notes, and I hope that's been useful for you. What other things do you do in your lesson? I'd love for you to leave a comment and let me know, and remember, give us a thumbs up if you're finding these videos useful. It really does help us, and the subscribe button is somewhere here, and the bell icon as well. It'll let you know when we go live on your phone. So, speak to you next time. Hope you're well. Bye.